My name is Blake Barclay, and I'm the chair of the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum, our student committee. I'm here zooming in from my home back in Pensacola Beach, Florida, and welcome to our inaugural FAST Forum, our new series for conversations with prominent public figures, including elected officials, journalists, and activists. While we can't be here together in person, technology is allowing us to convene virtually, and bringing FAST Forums online allows us to share Harvard University's premier arena for political speech, discussion, and debate across states and countries while we are remote for the remainder of the semester, and for that we are incredibly grateful. Now please join me in welcoming our moderator, Mr. Mark Gearan, the director of the Institute of Politics at the Harvard Kennedy School.
Great. Well, thank you, Blake, and thank you for your leadership with the Forum Committee, and good evening to all our students that are joining us and friends of the IOP from around the country. We hope this finds you safe and healthy at this rather unprecedented time. And for those of you and family members and friends who are suffering at this time, we expend our special thoughts and prayers. This is a heavy time for our nation and our world. And it's a time where especially I'm proud to be part of the Harvard community and the Institute of Politics, where so many of our students and certainly our graduates and faculty members are really working hard to make a difference. So we welcome you this evening. As Blake said, we're starting this FAST Forum, which is a 30-minute program, and with questions, certainly from the students and those gathered remotely in this way, where we invite elected officials, political activists, journalists, those really engaged in politics and public service, as is our tradition at the JFK Jr. Forum. Tonight, we turn again to the topic of the coronavirus. At our last in-person forum before spring break, our topic was the coronavirus, where Rick Burke moderated an excellent panel with one of his colleagues from the STAT and faculty members from both the Kennedy School and the School of Public Health. It was a sobering and important conversation. And tonight we continue that topic of COVID-19 and how the effect of the virus may be impacting our democratic institutions. And we have two outstanding panelists. Congressman Jim McGovern is a Democratic congressman from Massachusetts. He's represented the Worcester area since 1996, and he is the chair of the very powerful Rules Committee in the Congress. And LaTosha Brown, who is well known to those of us at the Institute of Politics. She was a resident fellow and led a very important study group and was very engaged in the Harvard community. She's the co-founder of Black Voters Matter and is a leading national expert in organizing. So we brought them together to have this conversation about the impact of COVID-19 and what it means for democratic institutions, literally from how the US House of Representatives is going to vote and whether they should vote remotely or how they will do it given the global pandemic that we're in the midst of, and how it will affect grassroots organizing and elections from the primary season to potentially into the fall. So we're very grateful to Congressman McGovern and to our great friend LaTosha Brown for joining us for this FAST Forum. So with that, let me begin with Congressman McGovern, who I'm hopeful joins us from—
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi,
Good.
Jim.
It works.
That's great. The power of technology. I hope this note finds you well in the nation's capital, and thank you for your own public service. But let me, if I could, jump right in, because this is a FAST Forum and your schedule must be extraordinary, given your responsibilities in the House. And as I said at the outset, we're wanting to consider our democratic institutions, given that the United States Senate voted 96-0 yesterday on this important package. 4 senators were absent, and the House will vote tomorrow. But Speaker Pelosi commissioned you to give a report to your Democratic caucus as the chair of the Rules Committee. And you have really been the point person in the House of Representatives to consider these issues. 70 of your colleagues wrote to you and said there should be remote voting. And you produced a thoughtful report commissioned for the Speaker with your recommendation that we should go through this rather extraordinary time in House voting with what is called unanimous consent. So could you speak to us about not only that, but the mood in the Congress, how this virus, how this pandemic is affecting the very act of voting in the Congress with your historic vote tomorrow?
Well, first of all, I'm glad to be with you. Hope everybody's safe and well. I mean, this is unprecedented, and members of Congress are back in their districts. Some come from states that are in a lockdown right now. Some members of Congress have, not only pre-existing conditions, but they have super duper pre-existing conditions. And I've learned a lot about that as I was working on this report. So it would be very dangerous for them personally to be able to travel during this time. One of the problems is that we don't have a system in place for remote voting. Over the years, various committees have done hearings on them, and they've always kind of concluded that it's too problematic. One is, I mean, technology keeps on advancing. So, the last time these hearings were held, technology wasn't what it is today. But, there are constitutional issues. Some constitutional scholars say there are none. The Constitution talks about Congress gathering in one place, not communicating like this. And, but I think they can probably be resolved. But then there are logistical issues, and then there are security issues. For example, technology isn't perfect. So, I mean, if we did something like this for debate and vote in Congress, if the Russians or the Iranians or the Chinese wanted to mess around with us, they could block some of our communication and kind of make us look incompetent. The second thing is that we have members of Congress, some who are very technologically advanced, some who are not. We have a lot of members of Congress who still use flip phones. So this technology is a very intimidating thing for many of them. So there's a learning curve here. We're not quite there. One of the things I pointed out is that if we were to just all of a sudden start with something like this, and you had members of Congress who couldn't get connected. What are the rules of debate when we communicate like this? And there's a whole bunch of questions. That'd all be on C-SPAN and would look pretty incompetent. Now we have to solve this, and I think what we need to do is once this crisis is over, figure out how we can plan for another situation similar to this. I would also say this: the rules of the House do not, at this present time, allow us to remote vote. So, and there are divisions in the Republican Party and in the Democratic Party about what to do. So we couldn't get a unanimous consent agreement just to change things. We would probably have to have a vote. So people would have to come back and vote on the change. So it sounds simple, but it's complicated.
Thank you. Thank you. And so the vote tomorrow will be by unanimous consent.
Well, we hope. We don't know. We have a couple of members who are threatening to demand a roll call vote, which means that we have to try to bring some people back here, and enough so that if there's a roll call vote, we have a quorum, we have enough people here to be able to pass the bill. I hope that's not necessary, but the Senate passed this thing 96-0. I mean, you had, conservatives like Ted Cruz support it. You had liberals like Bernie Sanders support it. So I don't know why the hell, anybody, would want to mess things up tomorrow. But unfortunately, a couple of members are talking about demanding a vote, which is unfortunate because it means at this moment that we need to call some members back. Again, in this era of social distancing and, and trying to be very, very careful getting on airplanes and gathering together, and we're not practicing what we're preaching.
Thank you, Jim. LaTosha, let's bring you into this conversation. You spent your life organizing for important causes, and you led a great study group here at the Institute of Politics where you made the point that good organizing requires knocking on doors and holding events and talking to people and rallies. So in this age of social distancing, as Congressman McGovern says, we've heard about it, how they're handling it in the United States Congress. How do you feel the impact of this will be? Obviously, we're already delaying primaries. And how do you see the effects of COVID-19 on our very basic citizen engagement and civic participation?
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. I know the ones in my study group and those that know me know that I always start and anchor even before any of my talks with song, because I do think it's important, even in this moment, for us to recognize this is really about humanity and that we're in the center of this. And so as we talk about these processes and the things we have to do, we've got to be centered that we're talking about human life. And I wish all of you all well that are watching this today, you and your family's wellness. And so you're right, Mark, you know, my entire life, what I'm known for is organizing on the ground, that ultimately in the last few years with Black Voters Matter, we've created our infrastructure in the field. And so what does that mean? What that means is that part of what is good organizing is being able to be flexible enough to really respond to what you have to work with in this moment. And so what does that look like and what does that mean? And, you know, I think it's really important for us to recognize that even in the midst of this crisis, while it's really important for us to address the financial issues and the financial crisis, it's also, you know, democracy delayed is dangerous, right? And so we have to be just as vigilant around protecting democracy in this moment. Matter of fact, I believe even more so. And so I think it's really important. We're 8 months out from the general election. What we do know is that even the Constitution, that on January the 1st, that seat will be open, right? Regardless, right? And so unless there's some kind of amendment to the Constitution, but ultimately we've got 8 months and we really have to expand this conversation around in some of the states, like many of the states I work in the South, absentee ballots and voting by mail is not necessarily an option, or there's barriers with that. So there should be conversations right now around what does it mean for us to expand the vote? What does it mean for us to really expand having equal and fair access to the vote right now, whether it's absentee ballots, whether it's early voting, really be able to think about what we need in place, because 8 months is not a long time, particularly in a campaign season like that. Is not a long time. I think it's important for us to really talk about expanding, how we expand access to the ballot. Also, how do we protect the health and safety of folks? And we know that a lot of the people who work in the polls, particularly the poll workers in the states that we're in, they're older and they're advanced in age. And really being able to be mindful around, we're going to have a big gap in poll workers and people that can work the polls. So we're going to have to be creative this election cycle on that. In the meantime, as it relates to organizing, it's as we've done right here, that we go to classes, go to the forum, but what we've done, we've had to move this virtually. So a lot of our organizing, we've also had to move virtually. We're doing virtual town hall meetings, we're sharing information, we're using technology to leverage on the things that we do on the ground, which is connect to people, be able to give them information, and how do we build a network.
Thank you, LaTosha. I did not introduce you as a jazz singer, but you proved it very beautifully here. Thank you for sharing that. Well, we've had a good start with the Congressman's reflections and LaTosha's. Let's, as is our tradition with the forum, go out to our audience virtually with questions. They've queued up in line with raising their virtual hand, and Luke Albert will be the first questioner. Luke, we invite you to identify yourself and your affiliation with Harvard.
Oh, there we go. Awesome. Hi, my name's Luke. I'm an undergrad sophomore at the college. So my question's actually somewhat of a two-parter. I apologize. But one was, how can we make these emerging emergency voting reforms like universal vote by mail permanent policies all across the country? And which do you two expect to successfully become permanent policies that we see going forward with our elections?
Great.
Thank you.
Great question.
Jim, do you want to start?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question. Look, I think one of the things we were trying to do in this package that we're going to vote on tomorrow is basically allow for or require mandatory vote by mail all across the country. And we wanted to put enough money in there to do that, given the fact that we have no idea how long this crisis is going to last. And we are very concerned, that it could last into the next election. We already have states canceling primaries, and some states, by the way, are more advanced than others in terms of vote by mail. But we ought to again, in the spirit of prevention, be putting the money in there to give states the resources to do that. We tried. The president was not cooperative. The Republicans in the Senate weren't either, which is unfortunate because we all, no matter what our political ideology may be, should be committed to making sure that everybody who can vote. And so I regret very much that we're going to probably have to come back in another package to try to make that fight. But we ought to make these, that's a sensible reform and it ought to be permanent.
LaTosha?
And so I'll respond to it as an organizer. I'll be really quick. I think it's really important for us to deal with this inside-outside strategy that we want the legislation, but there has to be pressure on the outside. So as students, I've got 4 things that I think that you could do. One, I think we really got to start preparing people. That part of what happens is we got to help people understand we don't like change. And so helping people to really understand that we want folks to continue to be engaged in this election cycle. So that's one thing, to talk about with your friends and your classmates around these different options. Second thing is we're going to need more poll workers. Like I said before, we've already seen that in states where we've got a shortage of poll workers. So young people, students can actually volunteer and start really putting themselves in a position so that you can become poll workers. Third thing is we really need to put a lot of pressure, not just on the federal level, but we know that the Secretary of State actually oversees the election in the state. We need pressure within the states so we can organize and do some advocacy work right now within these states and putting pressure to at least expand those vehicles that are there, like absentee ballots, absentee voting. And then the fourth thing, I think it's really important for every single student and person that's listening, you've got to find a political home. This is a moment for you to go in. We need all hands on deck. And so I think it's really important that we're having a broader conversation around this.
Excellent. Our next question is from Ara. Ara, welcome.
Sorry, one second.
Take your time.
Okay.
Great. Oh, nice to see you. How are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to still hear that you're singing, Miss LaTosha.
I'm so happy to see you.
I'm so happy to see you too. So my question is, it honestly leans into what you were talking about with like these considerations we have for voting. So we know that advocates for like reliable reforms on voting and like the accessibility and like going against suppression when it comes to like lines or when it comes to voting machines, like that is kind of under the pressure of COVID-19 and like things like that are having to be reformed in the primaries. As states are like now trying to reassess like how can people vote from home or just those kinds of measures being taken. So I'm wondering do you see these changes like having a lasting legacy on elections? And is this inadvertently making elections more accessible, just like institutionally from this pandemic?
I think it won't if we don't pressure it to. We have to make it be. I mean, I think part of the piece that we got to recognize around democracy is nothing static. Democracy is it's about the people. As long as the people are engaged, then that's how democracy is created. So I think it's really important in this process that we literally are putting in reforms to deal with what our immediate niche. There's a short term and a long term. The short term need, but fundamentally what we're seeing is we're actually witnessing the fragility of democracy in this country. And so now this is the time for us to really look at these systems to strengthen so that we can, as we move forward, that we really are expanding access to the ballot. And that's a good thing outside of COVID-19. That's a good thing for democracy overall. So thank you. I want to keep my answers short just because of what happened.
And I agree with LaTosha, and I would echo what she said too. This is a two-pronged fight. One, there's a fight at the federal level. We need to provide the resources to the states during this time if we want to see real change happen immediately. And two, there's the state fight. I mean, you know, people sometimes don't pay a lot of attention to the Secretary of State's races in various states. They're incredibly important. And look, you know, I don't want to sound too political here, but there are some who feel that the only way they can win elections is by suppressing the vote. And there has been a very concerted effort at the state level, and now we see it at the federal level, to make it more difficult to vote. Even in terms of registering to vote. In some states, it's easier to be able to register to buy a gun than it is to register to vote. And there's something wrong with that.
And Jim, do you see a political, if not consensus, do you see some momentum evolving?
Yeah, well, quite frankly, I had thought that, there would have been consensus to be able to provide the resources so that states could do whatever they could to make voting more accessible, in this age of, the coronavirus. But there was pushback, which has me nervous. And, I'm not into conspiracy theories. We have a president who does that enough for all of us. But, there is a growing fear that that if this continues, that the president will try to find a way to screw around with the elections. And we all know what the Constitution says. We're all, we all adhere to the constitutional principles, but he may not. And then what do you do then? And given the makeup of the courts, I mean, there's lots to be concerned about our democracy, as LaTosha said, and we need to make sure that people can vote and that everybody who's eligible to vote has that right to vote.
Our next question is from Lily. Welcome, Lily. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Good evening. My name is Lily Tong, and I am an incoming student at Harvard Kennedy School from Toronto, Canada. LaTosha, I need a ticket to your concert after this. But first of all, I have two questions. So the first one is that given that lockdowns have proven to be effective in China, what are the factors preventing municipalities from enacting a lockdown to contain the spread? And the second one is, how does the short-term economic loss during a lockdown measure up to the long-term economic paralysis resulting from prolonged lack of drastic measures?
Well, Congressman, could we ask you to take that in terms of kind of working with so many elected officials, I'm sure, in your district? How are you observing them?
Well, I mean, one is that some states have taken greater measures than others. Look, here's what we need to do, and that goes for governors, presidents, congresspeople, you name it, everybody. We got to listen to the scientists. We got to listen to the best medical advice. And we ought to look at what's working in other parts of the world. And I think what we're learning is that, kind of strong measures, up front can help contain this virus, can help flatten the curve that we all hear about every day. And so, I mean, and some of us have whiplash here because a couple of weeks ago, the president told us this is a hoax. Not that he told us we're fighting a war. And then the other day he said, I want the churches filled on Easter. So, I mean, what he ought to be saying is that I'm going to listen to the best medical advice. I'm going to listen to the science. I'm going to do what is in the interest of the American people to save lives. You can't save an economy if you don't save lives. And if we were to somehow, relax some of these restrictions or say, what the heck? You know what? We may find ourselves back in another moment where we have to lock down again, and this time our economy won't be able to come back. So yeah, that's why we're taking strong measures in Congress, the largest relief package in the history, I think, of our country. We're moving forward, to try to keep people afloat until this passes. But we need to listen to the science, and local and governors, by the way, they can decide what they want for their states. It'd be nice if we had a president that would do that and work in conjunction with our governors, but we don't have that luxury right now.
Our next student, LaTosha, did you want to add anything to that? Okay. Our next student is Kezia, who has a question for both of you. Kezia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kezia. I'm a senior at the college. My question is hopefully going to sort of end on a positive note. I'd love to hear what you think is going really well in the political process, and maybe share some bright spots that you're seeing or hoping for out of this.
Nice.
Well, I think, one positive thing is that the Senate voted 97-0 on a bill. You can't get 97 senators to agree on what to have for lunch, and yet they came together and voted for, quite frankly, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, an imperfect product. I mean, for me, it doesn't go as far as it should go. It doesn't devote enough resources to the most vulnerable in our country. For Republicans, it goes too far in a lot of areas. So, but I think people know the urgency of this moment and know we don't have a lot of time to screw around. So people came together. The other thing I'm going to tell you that I see the goodness in the American people. I'm hearing, in my district, I'm hearing all around the place, people, checking on their neighbors, when they go food shopping, buying food for an elderly neighbor or somebody who they know have a compromised immune system. I mean, just checking in on everybody, and supporting our local businesses, buying gift cards and buying takeout just to keep these businesses afloat. So, there's some good things happening. But I think we don't want to fool ourselves into a false sense of security that the political love fest is going to continue, forever, because some of the things we're going to have to do in terms of investment, may incur some very intense debate. So we have to be prepared for that.
LaTosha?
So I think the biggest piece, and I always talk about the radical reimagining of America, that, I think one of the things is we are ripe for change right now. Change doesn't happen until the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. And so I say that because I think in this particular moment, I'm hoping that this health crisis allow us to really examine that if 32 million people are not without health insurance, that we realize how interdependent we are as human beings, that the health of somebody else actually impacts the health of us, right? And so that we can have a real dialogue and more open dialogue around healthcare in this country. I'm hoping that in this moment, as we're looking at this crisis, right, that we reel it and we see the holes in democracy, that what comes out of this is a real commitment for how we've got to strengthen democracy so that we can, in fact, become this belief around American idealism becomes real. I believe that we're in this moment now that we're actually, I can tell you, I'm actually helping to teach my kindergarten child, and I have so much respect for teachers. I think teachers should get paid $1 billion a year, right? And so my point, I think that, right, I'm hoping that in this moment, that there is a different kind of focus on the significance and the impact of education in this country. And so I think that there's some core pieces that we're all forced to deal with that we haven't really been dealing with. We just kind of been looking at them as like headlines in newspaper that we're forced to deal with right now that would actually shape a stronger America coming out of this.
Well, Jim and LaTosha, we can't thank you enough for those words of inspiration to end on, but for your lives that you've led in public service and a commitment to the public good. Struck, you're both valued friends. And LaTosha, I love your Harvard sweatshirt and your patriotic feel, calling us from Atlanta.
We got school spirit.
Yes. And Jim, I think you're in your dining room. I remember that paint behind you.
I bought that painting in Cuba.
I remember.
But I wish I could sing like LaTosha. I would open up with the song, but if I did, everybody would tune out.
That's
but I just say one thing about what LaTosha said. I think is very, very important. I mean, this is a moment where people have to take this democracy seriously, where people really need to be engaged. And if we're going to have these discussions on expanding healthcare and on education and and supporting those who are most vulnerable, we need to make sure that we're electing people and elevating people who actually share those values. When people complain about, who serves in Congress or who serves in the Senate, I always tell people, we didn't get here by accident. People voted for us or didn't vote for us. And if you didn't vote, then you're part of, you don't like who's there, you're part of the problem. So this is a moment to mobilize. If ever there was a moment, it is now. So happy to be with you. Be safe, everybody.
Thank you so much. You've allowed us to begin this fast forum, 30-minute dialogue. We'll continue it next week. NBC's Peter Alexander will be our guest, reflecting on his coverage at the White House and the issues of the day. But you both have started us in wonderful ways, and we're deeply grateful to you. And excellent questions.
Thank you.
Our students. Blake started us well, and Kezia capped it off. She was an extraordinary chair of the forum committee as well. So thank you all. Be safe, everyone. Stay healthy. And thank you so much from here at the Institute of Politics. Have a good night.